Hi, welcome back to my channel and my review for A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, the original of this franchise that got the story of Freddy Krueger started. And this is a film that I've been wanting to review for a while. I did recently see the Never Sleep Again documentary, which for some reason I missed at the time that it came out. But what an incredible documentary. You know, if you're a Nightmare on Elm Street fan and you have an interest in the franchise as a whole, it's an incredibly detailed documentary. It's got all of the actors, all of the people involved in New Line Cinema, the directors. Just a very deep, involved documentary about the making of all of those movies. So absolutely fascinating stuff. So I've really kind of got the urge now to go back and revisit all of these films and do a little review series. So getting into this original movie, of course, you know, a lot of people who are familiar with horror will know Freddy Krueger in this movie. But the story here is about this child killer named Freddy Krueger, who, after killing a number of the young kids on Elm Street, the parents decide to get revenge by burning this character to death, burning this guy to death, who comes back later in the dreams of these teenagers and terrorizes them. And whatever happens to them in their dreams ends up happening to them in reality as well. This is a film that I've been watching for all of my life. It's one of the movies that really got me into horror. And I still definitely think, you know, it's 40 years old now, this film, which is insane. But this film for me does still really hold up. I think it still works very well. It's a very tightly made film, a lot of talent on board and a lot of creativity. And I think the thing about Elm Street that always stuck with me over the other sort of big horror movies in that wave during the 80s, you know, your Halloween, Child's Play, Friday the 13th, is I just thought the creative ideas surrounding the dream sequences and having this killer that can only attack you in your dreams. There was something just very intriguing about that concept, and obviously could set up a lot more unique scenarios and situations than we were used to seeing in horror movies of that similar ilk. And you know, I think Wes Craven, you know, is something very talented about Wes Craven. You know, his movies, he could do a lot on a very small budget. You know, this was a movie that was made by New Line Cinema, where they were a very, very small company, you know, basically had no money, and they put everything into this project in order to keep the company alive and took a lot of risks with this film. And obviously they didn't know, you know, the phenomenon that this movie was going to be, obviously setting up a hugely successful franchise that ran for over 10 years, which is just insane. But there's something about the concoction of everything in this movie that just works so well. The design of the character, you know, Robert Englund and his iconic performance as Freddy Krueger, he brought so many unique things to this role that really made it stand out. You know, this wasn't just a guy in a mask stalking teenagers. He brought something very weird and unique that has obviously always stuck with people. So there's something about the movie that it just really works, despite its problems. You know, it's far from a perfect movie. I do have things about the film now that when I watch it, I wish they'd have fixed back when they made it. But for the most part, this film, I think, still really holds up very well. And one of the things I really like about it is the lead character of Nancy. I think she was a very well-written character. You know, this female lead who is very proactive about the situation. You know, it's definitely a trope of horror films where you had a leading actress just being chased around by masked killers until they eventually were forced into a situation to have to protect themselves or whatever. But there's something interesting about Nancy that she very early on realises the kind of danger, the gravity of the situation, and takes things into her own hands. She's smart, she's tough, she's a character you can really get on board with. But she's also likeable as well. You know, she feels like a girl that you might actually know in your life. You know, she's got a nice set of friends, she's got a boyfriend, she's got a very normal life, but she's just got things about her that make her very charming and make her a very convincing lead character that's going to be the one to take on Freddy, obviously after all of her friends are killed off. And whilst I don't think the performance from Heather Langenkamp is perfect, you know, obviously, again, it's a low-budget film, and I think if you're comparing it to the obvious leading ladies like Jamie Lee Curtis, she's maybe not quite as natural of an actress as I think Jamie Lee was, but I love her affection for the character, the way she still talks about it now, Heather Langenkamp. I just appreciate her love for the role, and you could tell she was definitely passionate about the character in the film. And I do feel like that does come across in her performance, even though she clearly wasn't going to ever be this sort of big name actress. But she definitely worked, I think, for the lead character in this movie. I just still really admire as well how creative and incredibly effective those nightmare sequences were in this original Elm Street, particularly the sequence involving Tina when it leads up to her death. I still think is one of the best horror sequences we've ever had. And I just remember watching this as a young teenager. It just absolutely terrified me, just kind of waking up in this dream and looking out into the backyard and seeing this kind of guy skulking around in the alley out there. It's pretty terrifying, I think, for a young person watching this. Back in the day, I can only imagine how scary that would have been. But it's just, the whole way the sequence builds up, this freaky character of Freddy Krueger, just slowly revealing more and more things about him, how he's kind of unaffected by, he's cutting off his own fingers and smiling at her. Just these little details like that really make the whole thing very unsettling, all leading up to that extremely brutal death that she has, where she's dragged across the ceiling of her bedroom. And just watching the documentary on how they managed to do that scene where she's crawling along the ceiling and she's being torn apart, incredibly well done. Just like, it's one of those things where you have a limited budget and you really have to get creative with the practical effects work you were doing. Long before the days of CGI, you can imagine now if they tried to. Well, they are saying that they have done a remake using CGI. Like nowhere near the effect of this film. Something about it still today looks very weird. It's very creepy. And when you watch it, you're just like, you're trying to wrap your head around how they would do that, and using this rotating room where the cameraman and Rod are effectively strapped in upside down. Just amazing stuff, really amazing stuff. What they got away with and how good it looked in the final product is still very impressive. But what a sequence though, just fantastic. Whenever I go back to revisit this, it always surprises me by how much of a mark Freddy leaves, despite the fact he's only probably in a couple of minutes of the entire movie. And, whenever I think about Freddy Krueger, I tend to think of the franchise as a whole. You had this character that became such a large personality. Obviously, after, I believe, from Dream Warriors onwards, obviously they went into the comedy and the one-liners, and they kind of made him a big character that you wanted to see. It wasn't so much about the horror and keeping him in the shadows and scary anymore as much. And it's just interesting to go back and see this original film where he just has a couple of lines. You don't really see him until quite far into the movie. He's sparingly used, but he just definitely makes that mark. And I think this was the most effective use of the character when you didn't really know much about him. You just had this little backstory of this guy who just turns up in these dreams, this freaky character who kills you in disgusting ways, and just, there's something about that it just really worked. And the little subtleties that Robert Englund brought to the performance as well just really added to this character. And it's what made obviously the crew realise that he was the only man to play this role. You couldn't use a stunt person or whatever they tried to do. You had to have Robert Englund, because he really brought something to this that kind of made this character stand the test of time. But the use of him in this original film, very scary, very effective, and just a brilliant start to a brilliant invention of a character, I think. All kinds of weird, cool stuff they put in the movie as well, I think, that really do get to you, especially when you're younger. Like, you all remember having nightmares where you'd be running and something's trying to stop you from running. You're kind of caught or stuck on something and you can't get away. And I think they nicely capture those kind of moments in these dream sequences, with Nancy running up the stairs and all the stairs turning into like goo and gunky stuff that she can't get out of. Little moments like that kind of really build this vibe of really being in a dream where everything seems normal at first, but there's something just a little bit off. Like, another scene I'm thinking of is the one in the classroom where she sees Tina in the body bag outside, very creepy sequence, and you realise then she's dreaming, and then you see the boy at the front of the class is doing that speech, and he's starting to kind of whisper in a very odd way. It's like stuff like that. It does remind you of nightmares you would actually have where, again, first everything is normal and there's just little things start to happen when you realise, oh wait, I'm actually in a dream, I'm in a nightmare. And it's stuff like that that I really appreciate. I've always just kind of got really caught up in that. I love that. I love those nightmare sequences. But getting into some of the issues of the film, so not talking about the budget and just the obvious things that a movie from the early 80s would have wrong with it. But I think the main thing I've never been sure about with this movie is the ending. Well, I say I have a problem with it. I mean, basically everybody that's ever talked about this movie knows that the ending wasn't very good. Even the filmmakers themselves didn't think this was a good ending. And it came from the issues of the dispute between effectively the producer and the owner of the company New Line and Wes Craven himself, who directed the film, and the fact that obviously the company wanted sequel potential. You know, if this thing worked and it was successful, they wanted to be able to set up in it going in new directions. And Wes Craven kind of wanted this to just be its own movie, its one and done thing. So you kind of get this very odd ending that feels very rushed. It kind of goes against a lot of the logic of the film. Like when you start to think about how it plays out, you start to question how much of what you saw in the final half an hour was a dream, what wasn't. You know, if you really want to start picking holes in the movie logic-wise, there are problems definitely, and I think that final scene only adds to that. And the very cheap effect as well of dragging the mum through the window. It's just, what was that? So there is definitely things towards the end of the film which don't work. The final sequence I actually think is very good. You know, the lead up to that is actually really great. You know, where Nancy's setting up all the traps for Freddy and everything like that. It's a very exciting, tense final sequence. It just so weird and so rushed, that ending. I wish at the time they'd fixed that. I suspect if they'd known obviously what a success this movie was going to be, and the fact that, you know, even now people are talking about this online 40 years later and the popularity it's had, I suspect they would have done something to fix that ending and really go back to the drawing board and consider how they were going to see this movie out, because it's such a shame to leave such a great movie on such a bad note. You know, it really does spoil the ending in a lot of ways, and it brings the movie down a bit of a mark for me just because of that, because I think there's something to be said by having a great ending that can really elevate an average film, and here you've got a great movie with a really lackluster ending, so that was a bit of a shame. But other than that, I still think this is a very tight movie, really well done for its time, and still it stood up to the test of time. I still think it's a very enjoyable horror film to watch today. I think if you're seeing it for the first time, you'll still get a lot out of this. Still a great movie that I have loved and will continue to watch, I'm sure, throughout the rest of my life. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5 rating. Please do let me know down in the comments what you think of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Let me know all of your thoughts, and also please do consider subscribing to my channel if you have been enjoying my content. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.